Wanted to address some of the events that took place last night. The recklessness and callous disregard for residents in our city put a damper and a stain on a weekend that should otherwise be celebrated. Normally, we can expect difficult events and circumstances to take place on Friday and Saturday leading into a holiday weekend like this. In this case, it stemmed towards Monday. This is conduct that should not be acceptable in any city. The kind of violence, the recklessness, and in some cases idiotic behavior that we saw shouldn't be tolerated, and let me be clear, it won't be tolerated. People in our city deserve to feel safe, regardless of what neighborhood you live in. We need to make sure that we're holding the perpetrators of these violent crimes accountable. We need to make sure that youth have good and beneficial recreational activities to engage in. And we need to make sure that a weekend, a national holiday, our nation's birthday that should be celebrated is able to be celebrated. I want to be clear with the difference in jurisdictions that have been involved in some of both the preparations as well as the response leading into last night. The shooting that happened over at Boom Island is being investigated presently by the Park Board, but we are working hand in hand with them. Similarly, the events that took place over at the Stone Arch Bridge are also in the hand of the Park Board, while we in the MPD and at the city are investigating a combination of what happened at Gold Medal Park as well as what happened in the Mill District. You know, this is our city. We live here. We work here. We have families here and our futures are here, and while we have seen some really tragic events happening in so many other cities throughout our country over the last weekend and, to be frank, over the last several months, whether it's Kenosha or Chicago, whether it's Sacramento or Highland Park, we live here. We care about Minneapolis. We believe in this city, and it's up to us to make sure that we're doing everything that we possibly can to curb some of this recklessness and the violence that we've seen. Now, I want to be clear, it's on all of us. It's on our police department to make sure that they are strategizing every possible way to make sure that we are both holding perpetrators of violent crime accountable, that we are responding in a timely fashion, and we're gathering the necessary intelligence ahead of time so we can suss out some of these problematic situations before they happen. It's on our 911 call center to make sure that they are both properly staffed and are ready to go. It's on our fire department to make sure that they're working collaboratively with these other entities. And I should note that in the very, very near future, we're talking about in the next week, we intend to be bringing on a commissioner for the Office of Community Safety that will help us provide that comprehensive approach. This is no small task, and it will take more than our office. It'll take more than the MPD working on these issues. It has to be a collaborative and comprehensive approach, and that is exactly what we're going to be moving towards. This conduct is unacceptable, and I can say it 1,000 times over. And while we have a job to do at the city, I also want to say that it's on all of us throughout community as well. If you're the parents of children that were out last night, you need to know where they are. If you have friends that were involved in some of this horrible conduct, you need to be setting them straight. This is on all of us to be doing right by our city, and part of doing right by our city is holding one another accountable. That means holding us accountable here. It also means making sure that people, whether they're doing shootings or blasting off fireworks in a residential area, they need to be held accountable too. This kind of garbage cannot be tolerated in any city, and it's our job to make sure that it doesn't take place here in Minneapolis. I believe in this city. I believe in the power of what we can do when we work together. The bottom line is that we are better than this. and we need to make sure that we're showing the world that we are. So we're going to get into some of the specifics and the details as I hand it over to our interim chief, Amelia Huffman. What I will say, and she will reiterate, is a lot of what happened last night is already under investigation. And so we're not going to be able to relay all of the details that we have at this moment. But we will as soon as we get them in. So with that, I will turn it over to the chief. She'll discuss, our deputy chief, Eric Force, is going to be discussing some of the timeline and the circumstances that our MPD experienced last night, which, as he will reiterate, was a substantial case of whack-a-mole. There were hundreds of people that were gathered at a number of different unplanned, unsanctioned events that required the full strength of what we had on duty at the time, and more so. So with that, I will turn it over to our interim chief, Amelia Huffman.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for being here today. I couldn't agree more with everything that Mayor Frey has said today. I won't belabor his points, except to point out that on a holiday where we're meant to remember and celebrate the truly revolutionary ideal that every person has the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, there were those in our community who chose to engage in destructive, damaging, and dangerous behavior that deprived others of those very rights. Once again, we're here in this room to talk about guns in the hands of those who would use them to do harm. MPD officers, park officers, and the University of Minnesota Police Department officers responded to multiple incidents last night around 3 significant areas that involved gunfire and fireworks that were being shot off, specifically towards property, towards residents, towards community members, and when they arrived, toward officers. As you can imagine, this was an extremely challenging situation with a very large and hostile crowd, and the primary response by the officers was to restore order using the least amount of force necessary. The park police continue to follow up on investigations, primarily that of the individuals who were injured by gunfire at Boom Island Park, and they will have updates on their investigation in coming days. The Minneapolis Police Department is investigating a report of one individual who was injured by gunfire at Gold Medal Park, and we will have updates on this investigation in coming days as well. Over the course of last evening, between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m., there were more than 1,300 911 calls for service received at MECC. Our 80-plus MPD officers who were on duty responded not only to these reports of the destructive, damaging, dangerous gunfire and fireworks along the riverfront area, but other kinds of calls as well. Medical calls, domestic assaults, fights, overdoses, other sorts of medical calls throughout the city. Those 1,300 plus 911 calls for service are the same number of calls generated in a full 24-hour period just earlier this spring. So to give you some greater context to what that timeline looked like last night, I would like to turn it over to Deputy Chief Eric Force, who supervises our Patrol Bureau.
Thank you, Chief Huffman, and good afternoon to you all. As the Chief reiterated, we had a significant number of events that were, I would characterize as unsanctioned and unplanned, and also coupled with complex violent crime scenes that required our personnel to have to divide a lot of their attention and be extraordinarily diligent in how we responded. And in order to put that into perspective, I'll relay a little bit of what some of our officers experienced. This is not completely comprehensive, but an idea of the number of calls and events that went on in a short period of time. Around shortly before 10 o'clock at about 9:56, officers from both Park and MPD responded into the area of the Stone Arch Bridge on the southeast side with a report of a large gathering in the park and in the area. We responded to check that out and to respond to reports of fireworks being fired. At about 10:15 that evening, now across the river at Mill Ruins Park, the park police was attempting to close down the parking lots and were reporting there were hundreds of people and they were launching fireworks at people in squads and refusing to leave. That required a large response from the park police to begin to address. Elsewhere in the city at 10:20, we had a shooting with 2 people who were injured. To manage that scene required us to send 7 squads. At 11, shortly after 11, at around 11:12, officers from both the Minneapolis Police Department and the University of Minnesota Police were addressing a large group that were lighting fireworks in the area of Main Street Southeast, and again in the Stone Arch Bridge area. This group was reported as being uncooperative and resistant to leaving the area. In order to address this, we had to send 8 MPD squads, and the U of M police responded with 6. While we were dealing with that situation, shortly after that at 11:30, the shooting came out at Boom Island Park with a report of multiple victims and hundreds of people who were gathered in the park. This is a complex situation. This requires a lot of uniform response and is considered a very serious life safety event. All in all, 11 Minneapolis police and 9 park police squads responded to this call and the scene. While this was going on, we were trying to mitigate the crowd at Boom Island, trying to address the victims and the crime scene at Boom Island. There was still a crowd that was gathering in the area of Main Street Southeast and 2nd Street Southeast. And there was also crowds that were causing issues on the downtown side of the river, both at Mill Ruins Park and down all the way down to Gold Medal Park. At around 11:57, we had reports of fireworks and disturbances of juveniles in the area of 901 2nd Street shooting fireworks at people and buildings. That also brought in reports of people seeing people with guns and what they thought were gunshots. While we were addressing that, there was a call for an overdose, a life safety call that occurred in the area of 8th Avenue and 6th Street Southeast. We had a report that an individual or a male had been seriously injured at a large party. There were reports of hot rodders and assaults and shots being fired, and it required 7 squads to respond to that situation and to render it safe for medical personnel. Shortly after that, at about 12:30 a.m., we had a stabbing in the area of Chicago and Lake, where a male had been reported to have been stabbed by 7 to 8 suspects, and it required approximately 6 squads to respond to that situation. Again, this timeline is very tight, and as you can see, our resources were being spread across the city into multiple incidents at the same time. We had shooting victims start to arrive at the hospitals. Additionally, around 12:45 a.m. and also at 3 a.m. At around 1:12 in the morning, the situation was getting more challenging in the area, around 2nd and Portland. We had reports of large groups damaging property and shooting. In order to address and to help get this crowd out of the downtown area, we held over all of the entire mid-shift for the city and had every single response car come to the downtown area to begin the process of trying to move this unruly group out of the area, which is a challenging prospect to do in the sense that this group was resistant, did not want to follow any directives, and were also shooting commercial-grade fireworks at first responders. I think the officers did the best job they could in order to restore order to the area in a way that minimized the amount of injury and avoided the reliance on the use of what would be considered overwhelming force in order to do so. It's difficult to engage with the group when they're shooting fireworks at you and to do so in a safe manner. And we really had to come together as a group, and we utilized the personnel that we had in the best way we could to restore order to downtown. Chief.
Thank you.
Before I open it up to questions, I also want to address one far too common denominator that we've seen across cities in our country, which is guns. When these problematic situations arise, far too frequently a gun is involved. We need more common sense gun reform. When we've got guns coming into our city, both legal and illegal, by the trunkload, it makes it all the more dangerous for the general public. It makes it all the more hard on our officers who are trying to suss out a difficult situation without knowing whether someone is armed or not. Guns make a difficult situation treacherous. And the fact that parties cannot rally around the obvious, which is we need to restrict these unlimited gun sales that have consistently gone out into the general public, and then illegal gun sales from there, it's getting ridiculous. It's gotten ridiculous. I don't think another mayor, another family that has lost a loved one wants to be at another press conference delivering news and explaining why something tragic happened simply because the presence of a gun was in the hands of someone who shouldn't have had it to begin with. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
How many, sorry if I missed this, how many arrests were made last night? And were any officers or first responders injured?
I don't have a full tally of the number of arrests. I know that there was one arrest made in which an officer was assaulted and reported to have received a minor injury. I'm still going through all the rest of the reports currently.
Which incident was that in connection to, and how is the officer doing?
I don't have the full details on that one, but I know it was in relation to some of the activity downtown.
Obviously, it was July 4th. A lot of the neighbors are wondering, what was your plan coming into the night? You should have known that there were going to be crowds out.
We always utilize intelligence and planned events. For the 4th of July, there were no, unlike other years, there were firework events that would be going on downtown. Those have been canceled. As we discussed earlier, these gatherings that were occurring in the parks were, they're unsanctioned. They're not anything that we would be or were aware of at the time. When we know that we have events coming up or issues that are coming up that would require more personnel, we do staff up for things such as that. But in terms of a long 4th of July weekend, the Monday of a long weekend is generally not viewed as being the most resource intensive of that.
So you didn't have any extra staff for July 4th?
We had our normal complement for a night.
Were any of these groups related, or was it the same group? You described it as whack-a-mole. They're downtown, and then they go over to Dinkytown, or were these entirely different groups of people?
I haven't heard anything to indicate that they were interrelated, which again kind of points to some of the challenge that you could have 3 separate kind of unplanned or official or sanctioned gatherings that would occur in 3 different locations at the same time.
And just with the chronology of these all happening one after another, were there long delays in the actual response times of getting those squads out to the scene?
Actually, the squads were out at a lot of these for some significant period of time, but because the area that it was encompassing was so large, I think that for many people, they felt that they were not seeing the specific officers, but as I relayed some of the resources that were out there, some of these officers were on these calls for 2 to 3 hours continuously.
But I'm talking about the response time, like how quickly they were able to arrive to each of the scenes.
I think in relation to the number of calls and also considering that we had a series of complex life safety calls, that the response to these calls was fairly rapid.
Do you have a range of time?
No, I do not.
What's the plan to prevent this chaos from continuing tonight and later in the week?
Absolutely, I can take that, but I can also give you a little bit of information. I think, we've heard from some folks, particularly about the Boom Island call, wondering specifically how long it took officers to respond. And it was just a matter of minutes from the time that the 911 call was first received and the first park squad was assigned. It was about less than 4 minutes before there was an arrival, and then MPD was shortly behind that, another couple of minutes. So we're not talking hours of response time to those most critical calls. We are talking minutes.
There were people who were saying that it was taking several hours for especially the fireworks situations that were going on downtown. Can you provide more insight into why it took so long to contain that?
Sure. So as you could tell from the chronology that Deputy Chief Fours went over, we had folks in a very large area across both sides of the river in multiple incidents. And so I think when residents were looking outside, they were seeing one slice of what was a large geographic incident and may not have been able to see squads that were working on that problem from the other side of the block or down the street or around the corner.
You're saying those officers were there and they responded within minutes to all of these situations?
Yeah, we can take a specific look at each one of the individual calls for times, but in general, we had officers out all evening long dealing with one aspect of those problems or another on both sides of the river, both MPD and Park Police.
Chief Huffman, Mayor, are you satisfied right now with the current staffing levels of the police department? And what do you tell residents to give them some assurance here that we will not have a repeat of last night?
Yeah, we are absolutely not satisfied with the current staffing levels. The long-term solution for Minneapolis Police Department, like many of our partner agencies in the metro area, to be able to provide the best possible public service is to hire high-quality, community-minded officers to deliver that service to residents. And I feel like, yes, your question got missed.
What's your plan to prevent more of this chaos tonight and later in the week?
Absolutely. So we're working with our partners at the Minneapolis Park Police, who are working with the Park Board. One of the primary ways that we can minimize these incidents is to look at ways to deny access to these areas for folks to gather after hours. And prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so we will be working both from the city side and I know from the park side to look at ways to prevent large groups from gathering in these areas after hours when it causes so much trouble.
Will you be requesting mutual aid from surrounding agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. Mutual aid is incredibly important to us. We are so appreciative of the resources that our partner agencies are sharing with us now, and we definitely would welcome any additional assistance that anyone can give us. I understand that my counterparts in suburban agencies are also dealing with resource issues, but I am very appreciative of the help that they've provided so far.
What's your officer level right now compared to authorized strength?
So that number is a constantly moving target, of course, because we have folks who are sometimes coming back from long-term leaves like a military leave or a family leave after the birth of a child, and then folks going out on leaves. But as of the latest numbers from our official human resources database on June 18th, we had 564 active officers of all ranks who are responding to work in public safety assignments. So that's patrol, investigations, the inner workings of the police department, all the way up through me.
Do you have an update on the condition of those victims at Boom Island, and can you tell us maybe a range of ages?
I don't, because the Park Police is the agency that's investigating the Boom Island case. I don't have any updates on that. I apologize.
I have just two questions in terms of the staffing. At any point last night, did you consider calling more officers in? And the second piece of that, when you talk about how short you are in terms of the total department strength, do you have the officers to call in to bolster your force on a holiday weekend?
So we do work on bolstering our response, particularly for planned events or for time periods when we understand that there are going to be significant incidents taking place in the city. We are relying on overtime, voluntary overtime, to do a lot of that bolstering. And so all precincts are giving people opportunities to help bolster our staffing level, and that will continue. We do call in resources when needed, but typically the process of getting folks in from home does take several hours, and so that wouldn't have been able to provide us with the kind of immediate assistance that we would have wanted last night. I see Deputy Chief Forrest has something to add.
I just wanted to add, in terms of the question, in terms of the staffing that we had on last evening, and to Interim Chief Huffman's point of having people brought in for overtime, there were people who were brought in for overtime, and also to perform duties such as beats in the downtown area and robbery suppression as well. So that was in addition to what we normally would have on a particular evening. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Time for one more question.
Just to clarify on that, so you did have additional officers working last night than on, like, say, a random Wednesday? Like, I just want to make sure we understand, because there was a bolstered force last night.
We had some additional overtime slots out to provide extra presence both in business corridors and in downtown, yes.
Do you know if with the fireworks being shot off, I think in the Mill District, was that gang related at all? Two gangs going after each other? Do you know about that?
I have no indication that would be the case, but it's also early in the investigation as well.
I'd like to add on to his question.
This is the last question.
It seems the groups, and it seems to be a trend that's out there, consist of the so-called hot rodders. And, you know, it's seen on social media, they post their own videos. Is there anything that you guys are doing to curb cutting down on what they're doing? It seems that wherever there's this type of vandalism, anything like that, they're present.
I think you hit on a point where the influence of social media on the behavior and the behavior of youth. The hot rodding phenomenon, which may have some aspects, this I think was separate than that, and how we approach those things we also do separately. But it's difficult to get ahead of social media messaging and how people can, I would say, collect in short notice based on social media. And I think that goes back to the point that the mayor was making, in that with the young people, and a lot of them are juveniles that are engaged in this type of behavior. If you're a parent or influential adult in their life, we have people that are coming here from all over the metro. This is not just Minneapolis young people or Minneapolis youth. This is people from all over the metro, and even sometimes outside the metro, who are coming here and engaging in behavior that's not only damaging and dangerous for the community, but it's dangerous for them. And they're just as likely to be injured or have bad things happen to them by being involved in this behavior. So again, to reiterate, if you're a parent or someone who has influence in these young people, know what they're up to, know if they're taking your car and coming into Minneapolis to engage in this behavior, and do what you can to steer them away from that sort of a thing, because it does take more than just law enforcement to get ahead of something like that. Thank you for the question.